Hello and welcome to Team PokeMart, your one-stop shop for things that you need to stop and or shop for. And I'm sure that whilst you were shopping today, you may or may not have noticed the abundance of Mr. Mime all over everywhere. And basically what's happened is we hired them to clean the windows, but rather annoyingly, they started cleaning the invisible windows instead, which I must stress do not actually exist. So here's the deal. I, the long-suffering local manager of this institution, am going to suck it up and clean the windows myself. And we are going to sell these Mr. Mime to you, our wonderful, moneysome customers. Before I do that though, please do make sure to press the not at all invisible subscribe button for Team PokeMart, which will result in all of you valued individuals being updated on all of our latest stock immediately after it arrives. But for now, sit back, relax, slowly take out your wallet, and enjoy this glorified infomercial of the Mr. Mime line. And this line will commence with Mime Jr, the psychic fairy baby of the family, who was introduced in the Diamond and Pearl games, a whole three generations after Mr. Mime was originally introduced in Red and Blue. Mime Jr is a baby Pokemon, and as commonly present in the design choices of said Babymon, we have an excessive use of pastel colors, such as the pink that is prevalent in Mime Jr covering its head and the upper half of its body, ending in this cloud-like hemline here. However, the top of its head is covered by what I can only describe as a baby wizard hat, or perhaps a delicious soft serving of black sesame ice cream. Ice cream. As its name suggests, Mime Jr and actually all of the other Pokemon in the sign make a living out of mimicking others. Mime Jr in particular will imitate its foes in an attempt to confuse them, so much so that it should in theory be able to slip out of harm's way. However, since they do say that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, my alternate theory is that Mime Jr is simply able to flatter itself right out of danger. Meanwhile, Mime Jr being a junior implies that it is young and should learn as much as possible before evolving, which it does do to great effect. By mimicking the expressions and emotions of its trainers and other Pokemon, Mime Jr will actually learn and understand the feelings of others. And I can tell you right now that there are a whole ton of Mime Jr learning and understanding that I am furious with their Mr. Mime counterparts. Meanwhile, Mime Jr are known in the Galarian region to look for Mr. Rime, and once they find one, they put in a lot of effort to copy its dance moves, showing significantly more coordination than I would ever personally be capable of. And a Mime Jr will then go on to evolve into either a Cantonian Mr. Mime or a Galarian Mr. Mime once it learns the move Mimic, which it naturally obtains at level 32. So let's move on to examine Mr. Mime with its traditional Cantonian form, and right off the bat, this guy looks, well, he does looks far too human for comfort, that is. He's got this fairly pasty skin with red cheeks, which is easily a reference to the traditional Mime face paint that we see in general media. Mr. Mime at this stage is also, unfortunately for him, balding, with navy colored hair sprouting on either side of his head in an almost batwing-like formation. His body itself is made from red and white circular shapes, with humanoid arms and legs popping out, wearing white gloves and navy blue elf booties, which I imagine would be quite trendy in Santa's workshop and nowhere else. On the fingertips of his gloves are red pads, which actually help it in its miming routine, almost creating a barrier of force for it to touch, making its routine seamless. Mr. Mime are notorious for their skills in the creation of invisible objects, which only improves as it ages. Although to be fair, the standards of creation when it comes to invisible objects are fairly low. Mr. Mime will most of the time be wearing a huge and slightly disconcerting smile, but don't let this happy chap's grin fool you. If you ever think of interrupting its mime routine, expect a short, sharp slap around that thing you have that passes for a face. What's really funny about Mr. Mime though is that the gender ratio of this Pokemon is 50-50, yet it is called exclusively Mr. Mime, which in this day and age, well, let's just say I would have expected better of Kanto. Looking at its Pokedex entries reveal even more clever tricks up its invisible sleeves, as in the Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald games, it is noted that Mr. Mime is a master of pantomime and can convince any onlookers that something unseeable actually exists. And furthermore, once believed, the object does in fact become real, which is just blatant sorcery. As such, Mr. Mime is also known to use his talents for, how shall we say, darker pursuits, sometimes becoming a master of conning people, which I imagine is exactly what's happening here today, with these Mr. Mime planning on cleaning invisible windows and then sending me a bill for them. Crafty little shits. But now, seamlessly segueing away from Cantonian Mr. Mime, let's look at the Galarian form, and right off the bat, there are a few key visual differences, as well as typing, which has changed from a pure psychic type to a psychic ice type. Galarian Mr. Mime seems like more of a tank. His circular body is indeed more prominent, with a nod back to Mime Jr.'s hemline that I referenced earlier. The color red is basically gone now and is replaced with cool blues, which is very apparent in Mr. Mime's brand new icy yet smart necktie, which replaces is what was previously just like a red circle thing slapped on its chest. His shoes appear to be more stylized, featuring healed frozen souls, and in general they just feel much less elven than Cantonian Mr. Mime's shoes were. Galarian Mr. Mime's gloves now look like mittens now, which is going to keep him nice and cozy through those Galarian winters. Furthermore, its eyes are now narrower, and Mr. Mime also has a triangular nose. How fun, or not? I suppose that really would depend on your personal feelings regarding triangles. Sporting longer, more spiked hair, the sideburns have grown downward to mimic the shape of earmuffs, and honestly, I think this guy is far and away the most fashionable ice type in the entire series. He's just got, you know, the look. Sadly, there isn't much extra information known about Galarian Mr. Mime. However, the biggest thing that does set it apart from its Cantonian form would be its skills. Where Cantonian Mr. Mime is the miming expert, Galarian Mr. Mime would be the family tap dancer. Yes, this fellow will tap dance across the frozen landscapes and even create an icy floor to dance upon if he is indeed in warmer climates. It's not just for show though, as for his next trick, he will kick the ice upward and use it as a barrier. It's very similar to Cantonian Mr. Mime's invisible wall, just very much actually visible. And you know what, it makes me wonder if Cantonian Mr. Mime gets offended by the lack of actual miming performed by Galarian Mr. Mime, which is none. It really should have changed its name to Mr. Tap, and then its catchphrase could have been, "I'd tap that," except it still wouldn't have been able to speak, so it would have sounded more like Mr. Mime, which doesn't quite give off the same effect. However, the Galarian Mr. Mime is a very special boy or girl, as unlike Cantonian Mr. Mime, it has the option to evolve into Mr. Rime. And here he is, the most dapper lad or ladette you've ever met. And I don't know where quite to begin, honestly. I suppose let's see what stayed relatively the same from its prior evolution. So Mr. Rime still has his former hairstyle, which has now merged into a bowler hat, quite reminiscent of the 1920s. His facial features have changed quite a bit though, and he now sports this fantastic bushy moustache, and his eyes now have yellow irises and white pupils, which have a habit of staring quite intently into your soul, your soul, your soul, your soul. His clothing has changed somewhat, now being a long sleeve mime gent essentially, and having a happy face on its belly complete with a big red nose, which is pretty similar placement to the circle featured on the torso of its Cantonian relative. Mr. Rime's pants also appear to be much less fitted and therefore much more baggy, and he does keep his icy shoes, however they are now more like capped boots. Still proudly repping the ice psychic typing, this guy very clearly presents a visual resemblance to a certain Charlie Chaplin, who I don't think actually exists in this universe. However, it does explain the tap dancing, because yes, Mr. Rime has only gotten better from his days as Mr. Mime, and as such he indulges in even more and more tap dancing, even using its icy stick as a prop in its routines. So Mr. Mime would be the epitome of a natural showman. Now when looking at the prominent appearances of this Pokemon line, there is always going to be one very important lady that immediately springs to mind. Ash's mom has got it going on, and her name is actually Delia Ketchum, but referred to lovingly as Mimey. This recurring Pokemon made its way into the Ketchum household during the episode It's Mr. Mime Time in Season 2. And after a whole ordeal involving a circus, Ash dressing up in a Mr. Mime costume, and just shenaniganry from Team Rocket, Delia mistakes a real Mr. Mime that comes to her house for her son. Delia then cooks him a huge meal, as any loving mother would when your young traveling 10-year-old does finally come home, only to find eventually Ash and Mr. Mime both in her living room, with Ash finally revealing himself and Mr. Mime continuing to lap up the delicious dinners which Delia has prepared. And from then on, these two were inseparable. And in other episodes afterwards where Delia is present, Mr. Mime is often shown wearing an apron and assisting his newfound MILF trainer. Now, just on one of my favorite topics being, of course, MILFs, let's skip ahead a few generations and take a look at Melanie, the Shield exclusive Cirencester gym leader, specializing in ice-type Pokemon. And really, Sword players truly missed out by getting her son Gordy instead of Melanie, which just as a fun fact is spelt Melanie, like Meloni, kind of like the word melons. Yes, melons. But on Melanie's champion tournament team, she has a Mr. Rime, and interestingly enough, all of her Pokemon are female, including the Mr. Rime in question. Weirdly enough, Mr. Mime are definitely not exclusive to hot mothers though, as going all the way back to Kanto, Saffron City's gym leader Sabrina has a Mr. Mime on her team, which sadly does not make it onto her Pokemon Yellow team. However, Mr. Mime is then present in a lot of her reappearances throughout more recent games. Meanwhile, Sinnoh's Elite Four member Lucian has a Mr. Mime on his team too, proving Mr. Mime to be a popular choice for psychic experts. And now one more trainer who uses a Pokemon from this line line would be Dexio, one of Professor Sycamore's assistants who made his debut alongside his partner Dina in the X and Y games, and are of course present in the games following this title. And as such, when you first battle with Dexio, he has a Mime Jr. Although sadly after this battle it doesn't seem to be present in any later battles, even in an evolved form, meaning that Mime Jr. was probably rejected. Some more fun facts about the Mime line. Mime Jr., rather tragically, has the lowest base HP of all Psychic and Fairy type Pokemon. It is a poor thing, but then again, it is practically useless anyway. In the Pokemon Red and Blue games, there is an NPC who will ask you to trade a Clefairy for his Mr. Mime, which is named Marcel, and this is supposedly a reference to Marcel Marceau, a French mime artist and actor who was known by his stage name of Bip the Clown, and is effectively personally responsible for every mime stereotype that you have ever seen or experienced. Now in Pokemon Yellow, this very same trait does exist, however Mr. Mime's name is instead Miles. And then in Fire Red and Leaf Green, it goes by Mimian. And as far as I can tell, there is no greater reasoning behind these names, other than the fact that they both start with M and I, just like mine and mime. Galarian Mr. Mime, the tap dancing one, rather unfortunately has to share its title of the dancing Pokemon with Oricorio, the dancing bird native to the Alola region, which specializes in a wide variety of dances, although thankfully none of them are tap. And finally, a truly useless fact, according to the Bulbapedia, Mr. Rime is the only Pokemon introduced in Generation 8 that can know a move that can't actually be used in Pokemon Sword and Shield. This is due to it evolving from a Mime Jr. who learnt moves like Double Slap, Meditate, and Wake Up in a previous game, and was then assumedly traded over to the newest game via Pokemon Home. And there you have it. I'm sure that was everything that you needed to know about these happy yet slightly creepy con artist Pokemon. Please do stop by immediately, give me money, and take one of these damn mimes away. Please, just do it. And I guess please do also make sure to stop by Team PokeMart just to say hi, which you can do in the comments below. And if you're interested in some of our other merchandise, then please do click these tantalizing links over here. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for regular updates on our new stock. But for now, this has been Team PokeMart, and I'll see you next time.